Hey everybody, what's going on? One of my more recent videos chronicled my trip to Japan and specifically the opportunity to drive 4 different iconic JDM cars up on the Hakone Turnpike. For this video, I thought I would talk about the overall experience, the driving in Japan, the Hakone Turnpike, and some of the other toge roads that I was able to drive. I was able to drive 4 different iconic JDM cars, and so I thought I would talk a little bit about my impressions of those cars and which one I liked the most. All right, so let's talk about the road first of all. Hakone Turnpike. Some of you may have heard of it. There's even a special edition of the GR86 that is named after this particular road, and that's because it is a popular mountain driving road for Japanese driving enthusiasts. It's a couple of hours out of Tokyo, maybe about an hour and a half, and I don't remember exactly the distance, but I will look that up and share that with you somewhere down here. But yeah, a fairly short drive from the city to get up to the mountains. So for those who are looking for that quintessential mountain drive coming out of Tokyo, Hakone ends up being one of the more popular choices. And it's a toll road, so the condition of the road is actually quite nice. The road is super smooth, and so therefore, even if you're driving kind of a stiffly sprung sports car on coilover suspension or something that's pretty stiff, even so, the car feels pretty smooth and planted because the road is so well maintained, and no undue bumpiness cause you any discomfort. You do have to pay to drive on the Hakone Turnpike, but in my mind, well worth it. Now, let's talk about the cars. As I had mentioned, I got the opportunity to drive 4 different Japanese cars, and you could say that each one of them is an iconic JDM car in its own right. So let's talk through those, and I'll give you my impressions of each one. Granted, had a somewhat limited time driving each one, but over the course of a full 10-hour driving day, I did spend some decent amount of time behind the wheel of each one. So let's start with the Nissan GTR, the R35 GTR, so the latest one. That one is probably one of the more familiar cars to me because my friend Oleg, up until fairly recently, owned an R35 GTR. And you may have seen a prior video where I went out driving with him and had a chance to ride along in the car. So very cool. The car is, kind of a beast. It's even from the factory, it's very powerful. It's got all-wheel drive, so it's got traction for days. I was just amazed by how much grip it had. And so as the first leg of the trip, driving from Tokyo to Hakone, I did the stint in the R35 GTR, and I feel like maybe that was the perfect car for that particular leg of the trip. It's an automatic, so no need to shift. This being the first time that I've ever driven a right-hand drive car, it definitely took a little bit of time for me to get familiar with the idea of driving on, the wrong side of the road, and on the wrong side of the car, as it were. So definitely glad that I had a car that I think would be much easier to get accustomed to and drive because it's an automatic. Though then you're not also dealing with the learning curve of trying to shift with your left hand instead of the right, which is, of course, what I'm used to here in the US. And so the first leg of the trip, we drove from Tokyo to Hakone, and a good chunk of that was spent on the highway. And so, like I said, just getting used to kind of driving in Japan and using the automatic transmission, just learning as I go. So the first leg of the trip was mostly on the highways, and so it was a good opportunity to learn my way around the Japanese roads, kind of just get familiarized with the idea of driving in Japan in a car that was automatic and fairly hassle-free in terms of just the driving experience. Just had to get used to driving on the right-hand side of the car. I will mention, though, that it was a little awkward because jumping between the different cars, some of them had the windshield wiper controls and the turn signals on, a given side of the steering wheel, but then you jumped into a different car and they were reversed. And so that took a little bit of adjustment too. And there were a few times, because it did rain a little bit during the drive. And of course, you do have to use your turn signals. So there were a few times when I was trying to use my turn signals and I accidentally turned on the windshield wipers, or vice versa. It would start to rain and I try to turn on the windshield wipers, but accidentally hit the turn signals instead. So a little bit confusing and embarrassing, but something I guess you will get used to if you're driving a particular car for a little while. And I know some of the other people on the driving tour had commented the same thing, that we all just kind of joked that we were all hitting the wrong switches as we were driving along. But anyways, as I had mentioned before, the GTR is a beast. It's just a wonderful car and kind of perfectly suited for the Hakone Turnpike. You pass the toll booth and then you start this climb up the hill, and the road is fairly smooth. I would say there's definitely curves, but there's some portions of the turnpike that are fairly straight, and so you can really get on the power with a car like the GTR and really enjoy the acceleration. So really fun car to drive, and I think an excellent choice for the first leg of the driving experience. But at the same time, the GTR is also a bigger car. It's probably one of the bigger cars of the four that I drove that day. And so dimension-wise, it's kind of a wide vehicle. And in fact, Josh, our tour guide that led the driving tour for the day, he actually cautioned us that when we drove on some of the more narrow sections of the mountain pass, that especially in the wider cars like the GTR, you'd have to be a little more careful. So as a result, I would say the GTR is a fantastic car, especially when the road got a little bit damp. So during that first section, I was certainly glad to have the all-wheel drive, and it just gave me a little more confidence knowing that, I was going to have good traction no matter what the conditions were. All right, moving on to the second car that I drove, the GR Supra. And I was very much looking forward to driving this car. I've heard such good things about it from others, and everybody loves the Supra, right? It's an iconic Japanese sports car, even if it is manufactured in this generation by BMW. I think the spirit of the Toyota sports car is still alive in this car, and so I was very much looking forward to driving it. But I have to say, I was a little bit surprised that I ended up feeling like this was not my favorite car of the group. I think the visibility out of the driver's seat is not great. I had a hard time figuring out where the edges or the corners of the car were. And so therefore, when I was driving, especially on some of the tighter mountain roads, I didn't have the confidence to really push as hard as I would have liked, and as I was able to do with some of the other cars. I just felt like, it's a narrow road. These are 2-lane roads. So, of course, the rule is you never cross the center line. You don't want to move over into the other side in case there's oncoming traffic, of course. And so you have to control your pace. And so for me, I felt like I didn't really have the confidence to push that hard because I was concerned that I wouldn't be able to stay on my side of the road with the Supra. Just kind of not being familiar with how the car handles, how it drives, and stay within my lane. And so, yeah, I kind of struggled with that, and I could definitely see that some of the other cars, the other drivers were, maintaining a pretty good pace, and I was having a hard time keeping up with them. Now, maybe it's more of a confidence issue. Maybe I'm just not as familiar with the car, but on the other hand, I feel like with the other three cars, I certainly felt a bit more comfortable, I guess. And who knows, maybe that's with the time spent driving them later in the day or just me warming up. I don't know. But for whatever reason, with the Supra, I just didn't feel like I was connecting with the car all that well. The car is very powerful. It's a very fun car to drive. And I'm sure, in a straight line, it sounds fantastic and it accelerates like nobody's business. So, fantastic car. But perhaps I would like to give it another chance at some point. Maybe if I can have a left-hand drive car here in the US to drive and check out, I might change how I feel about the Supra. Now, moving on to the Suzuki Alto Works, tuned by Monster. I gotta say, this was the car that actually surprised me the most. It's a tiny little K car, pretty unassuming in appearance, at least in stock form. Now, the one that we drove, of course, is tuned by Monster, and it's all stickered up. It has racing livery and decals all over it. So, of course, it looks the part. But I was not expecting the drive to be as good as it was. I have to admit, that was probably not my first choice or even my second choice in terms of what car I wanted to drive for the day. When I filled out the rental form and you have to pick what your preferences are, what cars you want or would like to drive during the tour, you look at their selection of various JDM cars and you pick your first preference and your second preference. And so for me, the first pick was the Nissan GTR and the second pick was the Supra. I didn't necessarily want or think that I wanted to drive the Suzuki. But as it turned out, the day that I signed up for the driving tour, we had a larger group. We had 4 different drivers, and so therefore we had 4 different cars that we got to sample during the driving tour. And I guess somebody must have picked the Suzuki Alto Works. As it turns out, I'm actually pretty glad that I had the chance to drive it. The Suzuki Alto Works is a K car. That means it's a tiny little Japanese car with a small engine, but this one is tuned, so it makes a little bit more horsepower than the factory model. And it also has a bunch of suspension modifications. The remarkable thing about K cars is that they can be very lightweight. This Alto Works was super light in comparison to a normal car, and certainly way, way lighter than cars like the Supra or the GTR. And so I found the Suzuki to be super responsive. In some ways, it reminded me of my MR2 Spider when I had that. Not very powerful, but very lightweight, and therefore a peppy and responsive drive out on the canyon roads. So yeah, the Suzuki really did surprise me, and perhaps might be one of my favorite drives of the day. This one was also my first experience driving a manual transmission on a right-hand drive car in Japan. So definitely was a little bit weird, but I found shifting with my left hand was actually not as difficult as I thought it would be. I guess maybe I adapted to it well. It's certainly a bit of a mental uh, challenge at first. You're just trying to remember how things work, but shifting on the opposite side, I was able to drive okay and have a lot of fun driving on these roads. Last but not least, the Mazda RX-7 FD3S. Kind of a legendary car, and definitely on my list of JDM dream cars. The rotary powered RX-7 is just a legend in the JDM auto enthusiast circles, so I was very much looking forward to driving that. Now again, this actually wasn't one of the cars that I had requested to drive, but certainly I would say the RX-7 would have been pretty high on my list of alternate choices. I'd never driven an RX-7 before, not really that familiar with a rotary engined car, but you know, from everything you see in terms of videos or going to car meets and seeing and hearing these RX-7s, it's such a unique experience, right? You get to hear a totally distinct sound of the rotary engine, so it's just so different from the experience of other cars. And so that was something that I was really looking forward to experiencing. And as it turned out, I think ended up being the car that I spent the most time behind the wheel of. Largely because when we left Hakone and headed back to Tokyo, we actually got stuck in a fair amount of traffic. I guess there was some sort of accident on the highway. And so I think we spent perhaps almost 3 hours driving back from Hakone to Daikoku. Slow traffic, stop and go traffic. I managed to drive with the manual 5-speed, with the clutch, everything. Managed to do it without stalling the car while we were in traffic. So I consider that a win. But yeah, actually, it was a good experience. The car was not all that difficult to drive, and being a car from the 1990s, it actually felt very much similar to my own MR2. And so I think that definitely helped in terms of the driving confidence that I had in that car. I would say the dimensions of the car are pretty similar. Just the overall feel, the weight, and the power, it's all fairly similar to the SW20 MR2 that I have here in the US. So the RX-7 felt very familiar, and I didn't really have any problems getting adjusted to it, which is a good thing because, like I said, I ended up spending the most amount of time behind the wheel of that car, just driving on the highways and a little bit in traffic heading back to Tokyo. Well, which of the 4 cars did I like the most? It was a difficult choice. I actually liked all of them in their own different way. But as I mentioned before, the Supra, I think, was the one that was most difficult for me. And so I'll put that in last place. The GTR, I would say, is a fantastic car, but not really my taste in terms of, the size of the car, how big and heavy it is. You can really feel that heft in the corners and when you're driving. But don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic car. It makes a ton of power, and it's quite fun. I think my personal preferences lean more towards smaller, lightweight cars. So I think the RX-7 and the Suzuki are actually sort of more my jam. And so, in fact, choosing between those two, I actually had a hard time. I think they both were fantastic to drive. And like I said before, the little K car, the Suzuki Alto Works, surprised me with how fun it was, how peppy and just agile it was in the corners. And in some ways, I think maybe that is the perfect car for these kinds of Japanese mountain roads for the Touge. I definitely enjoyed the experience of driving that car. And like I said, even though I had not originally planned or wanted to drive that car, I was certainly glad that somebody else had picked it. And therefore, I had the opportunity during the 4-car tour to experience that little car. And, yeah, it opened my eyes to the fun and the agility and just overall pleasure of driving a tiny little K car like that. But that being said, I still feel like the RX-7 takes the crown. I think, everybody admires the RX-7 aesthetically. I think it's one of the most beautiful cars of the 1990s. The MR2 is a close second to that in my mind. But if you look at the RX-7, it's just perfectly sculpted. I mean, it looks so modern and so classic that they could make that car today, and I'm sure it would sell like hotcakes, even if they didn't change any of the styling. And in fact, I think Mazda has put out 1 or 2 concept cars that borrow very heavily from the RX-7's styling. And so that's a very good-looking car. If they ever made that, I would certainly consider it. But it's not just looks with the RX-7, right? It's that unique experience of the rotary engine, which makes great power from a very small motor. It has such a distinctive sound. Of course, the car that I drove was tuned up a little bit. It had some power mods like a upgraded intercooler and also upgraded suspension. So, yeah, quite the pleasant car to drive. Although it was stripped out, I guess they kind of made it into a bit of a track machine or a Touge drift car or something like that. The interior was stripped out in the back of the car, and they had installed a roll cage, so it definitely felt a bit racy. A lot of the sound insulation was missing, so the car was a little bit more creaky, and the coilover suspension that it was on was especially noisy. So I guess that did affect some of the comfort and convenience factor of driving the RX-7. But for a day trip of only a few hours driving up into the mountains and back, I think it's totally fine. I could totally live with those disadvantages for such a short experience. If I had to drive it as a daily, then maybe I would think twice about wanting a noisier car with the stiff suspension and one that makes all that noise. But anyways, the RX-7 I think is my favorite of the 4 because it's similar in dimensions, as I said, to my MR2. It's even got the same pop-up headlights, so it felt very familiar, and I was pretty comfortable driving it in relation to the other 3 cars. And so my pick would be the RX-7. All right, well, let's talk about Daikoku. I think visiting Daikoku Parking Area would be the highlight for many car enthusiasts of a car-centric visit to Japan. And that's because the Daikoku Parking Area is so well known around the world as being kind of a hot spot for Japanese car enthusiasts to gather and show off their cars. And so lots of really cool cars show up throughout the day, but especially on the weekends. The place has kind of garnered a reputation for being a cool spot to check out, and so you end up with a lot of visitors coming out as well, people who are essentially tourists like me, who would come out just to check out the scene. So Daikoku is kind of a special place, right? You've probably seen videos about it or heard about it from somebody. It's kind of like Japanese cars and coffee, essentially. Just a bunch of cool car enthusiasts gathering to show off their cars, check out each other's cars, and it's kind of a chill vibe, at least until when it gets later in the night and maybe things start to kick off and get a little hectic. But I was just really looking forward to checking out Daikoku. And in fact, I didn't think I was going to get the opportunity to do so until I saw that the Driver's Lounge offered a tour package that would allow you to spend basically 10 hours of a day driving up to Hakone and then back to Tokyo and stopping off at the Daikoku Parking Area. And so when I saw that that was a possibility, I signed up for that tour, and as a result, got to visit the Daikoku Parking Area, an area that, without a rental car or, without some sort of method of getting out there, you're not going to be able to check it out. I'll refer you back to the video itself of the tour and the driving and then the visit to Daikoku if you want to see what that scene looked like. But it was pretty amazing. Lots of really cool JDM cars showing up. I didn't think I would see so many R34s in one place. But yeah, they seem to be quite popular and such a cool sight to see. And it was a pretty good mix of cars. You'd get some classic Japanese cars, really well-maintained cars, really clean examples of AE86s and some old Datsuns, just really amazing stuff. Essentially every car that comes out to Daikoku tends to be in really good shape. Of course, I live in California where it's kind of an automotive culture. You see a lot of really nice cars in the Bay Area as well. But you do see a mix, right? You see when you go to car meets and even Cars and Coffee, you'll see this kind of eclectic mix of old cars and new cars. And especially with the older cars here in the US, I think there's a certain percentage of them that are, a little beat up. They're a little worse for wear. And, maybe they're project cars. They are works in progress that the owner has picked up a car that, isn't in the best shape, but it's their goal to, build up that car and restore it to its former glory and, kind of rebuild it in their own vision. So I guess often what you'll see at car meets here in the US is cars that are kind of, in the midst of that kind of build or restoration, whatever you want to call it. But I guess what was remarkable to me was in Japan, you don't really see beat up looking cars like that. I just felt like every car that showed up at Daikoku was kind of in pristine condition, just show-worthy cars. Everywhere you look, these cars are basically just gorgeous examples of the car, whatever that car may be. Really impressive, and I don't know if it's just a cultural difference. Maybe in Japan, people have a certain sense of pride and dignity about their cars, and for better or worse, maybe they feel like, okay, if the car isn't perfect, I'm not going to bring it out. And so you end up seeing just essentially nearly perfect cars showing up at these gatherings. And I don't know what happens with all the other cars, the ones that are, still not in 100% shape, not perfect. Perhaps they just sit in the garage or in somebody's shop until they are ready. And so I don't know. It's maybe if I spent more time in Japan and traveled a little more, spent more time looking for cars like this, maybe I'd start to see more cars that were not in tip-top shape. But just from what I saw, it seemed like generally cars that showed up to these kinds of meets and gatherings were just in pristine condition. So kind of amazing. Now, as I mentioned, I am from California, and you become a bit jaded by the kinds of amazing cars that come out to things like Cars and Coffees or car meets, car shows. in that sense, going to Daikoku was not as crazy of an experience as I thought it would be. And I think that's just entirely on me because I'm so used to seeing an amazing array of cars back home. And I realized that most people throughout the world and even in other parts of the US would come to Daikoku and be completely blown away because they won't have seen many of these cars. They might not have ever seen an R34 Skyline in person. The fact that I live in the Bay Area, I have seen R34 Skylines. There's obviously a strong JDM enthusiast community in California. And as you probably know, you can import legally R34s now into the US. And so you're starting to see more of these cars. You're starting to see some of these other JDM cars that have never been available for sale in the US, at the time that they were being produced. So, S15 Silvias, Mitsubishi GTOs. Obviously, the K cars like the Suzuki Alto Works and, many of the other things like Daihatsu Copens or Honda Beats. Those are all cute little K cars that up until fairly recently, you just never saw these things here in the US. So if you aren't lucky like me and you've come from maybe a different part of the US or some other part of the world and these cars just aren't generally around, then I think you'll be quite amazed at what you'll see at the Daikoku Parking Area. If you've been with the channel for a while, you probably know that last couple of years I've been trying to go to the Monterey Car Week series of events that take place down in the Monterey area, and I've made a few videos about that. In fact, I have more videos coming. Anyways, in Monterey, you just see an incredible assortment of cars. Bugattis, Koenigsegg's, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Porsches, of course. Just all kinds of amazing stuff. Incredibly rare automobiles that you just never see anywhere else. Literally millions and millions of dollars worth of automotive glory all in one place. So in that sense, unfortunately, I become a little bit jaded when I see, something like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. I might think, oh, gee, that's cool, but, I've definitely seen, a Ferrari F40 in person before. I saw one in Monterey. Or, I've seen a Lamborghini Aventador SVJ at my local Cars and Coffee, on a Sunday. And so, unfortunately, I come from that kind of perspective where, and again, like I said, I'm extremely lucky to be able to say that I have the opportunity to see these kinds of amazing cars on a more regular basis. But I guess what I'm trying to say, though, is that, if I take that out of the picture and I think about the kinds of cars, the assortment, the enthusiasm, and how pristine these cars are showing up at Daikoku, I have to say, it's quite impressive. It's definitely a must-do or must-see on any automotive enthusiast's bucket list. So if you're thinking about going to Japan and, thinking about swinging by the Daikoku parking area, I guess what I'm basically saying is definitely go check it out. It's really cool. Now, what was interesting was Josh, our tour guide from Driver's Lounge, he basically told us that, the goal of our visit to the Daikoku parking area was to get there a little bit earlier in the evening. It was already after dark, but he didn't want to get there too late because he wanted us to experience what he called sort of the authentic Daikoku experience, which is to say, I guess, smaller crowds, but, very enthusiast focused, fewer Ferraris and Lamborghinis and just more of the classic JDM cars coming out. And so thankfully we got there, like I said, early in the evening and were able to experience some of that as the night went on. Things would start to get a little bit busy, and you start to see more crowds and sort of more of the flashier cars, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Porsches, still a good mix of cars, but it did sort of become a bit more of that Fast and Furious kind of lifestyle. Start to see more cars with the LED or neon underglow. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's kind of a different vibe. I thought it was pretty cool to see the contrast between those two kind of perspectives on JDM car culture. Speaking of Fast and Furious, I have to say the experience leaving Daikoku was quite unique. Honestly, it felt like I was part of the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift movie, or maybe even the original Fast and Furious scene where Dominic Toretto rolls up in his RX-7, which is, of course, what I was driving, and just rolling through the crowds at the Daikoku meet and just kind of attracting everyone's attention as I was driving through. And there were so many people standing in the way that I had to rev my engine in order to get everybody's attention and kind of get them out of the way. I don't know, maybe it just felt natural that instead of using the horn, I felt like it was maybe more appreciated or culturally more appropriate to just rev my engine to get everybody's attention, because I think honking the horn is probably considered rude. But yeah, totally felt like a celebrity rolling out of there. And unfortunately, we didn't get any footage of that, but I was busy basking in the moment of, for a brief period of time, I was Dominic Toretto in the RX-7. So truly a memorable experience. So all that being said, definitely recommend going to check out the Daikoku Parking Area if you have the chance. Even the drive to that location, I felt, was pretty special, right? Like you're driving along all of these Japanese highways as it gets dark. The signs, the roads, the curves, everything is lit up in ways that are just totally different in appearance from what I'm used to back in the US. And so it's just kind of a cool experience. In some ways reminds me of the video games that I used to play on the PlayStation, being able to drive some of the, at least in the virtual world, the Tokyo highways. And now I was actually doing it. So what a cool experience. What a great opportunity to, essentially live out a bucket list activity that, any JDM car enthusiast like myself would just absolutely love to experience when visiting Japan. And so with that, I think I'll just wrap up by saying a big thanks to the Driver's Lounge. That is the rental car company that orchestrated this driving tour for us. And they offer their services, they offer their tour packages to everyone. Check out their website at driversloungejp.com. You can get more information about their services and the different cars that they have available in their collection. I had the opportunity to drive 4 of the cars that they have in their collection, but they actually have many more. And perhaps you might choose different cars than the 4 that I was able to drive. Let me know if you've done this tour with them and which cars you were able to drive. Leave a comment about which JDM dream cars would be on your list. Which cars would you most love to be behind the wheel of? All right, well, I think that's going to be it for now. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion of the JDM dream cars that I was able to experience. And I encourage you to get out there and sample some of this amazing automotive culture for yourself. All right, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.